Greetings, dear learners. In the last class, we learned basic understanding on the various terms related to toxicology, like toxicology, poisons, different branches of toxicology. Today, we will learn about the history of toxicology. The knowledge of toxicology dates back to the history of mankind. According to Indian mythology and tradition, the origin of poison is attributed to Lord Brahma, the creator of the universe. It is said that once Lord Brahma was offended by Asura named Katava and he created poison to kill him. He was no doubt successful in destroying the demon with his new weapon called poison, but its evil spread all over the world. So much so that to minimize its bad effect, Lord Brahma had to distribute it all over the vegetable, animals, and mineral kingdom. He also had to create its antidote. So, Lord Brahma thus allowed the classification and the initiation of the poison. The classification included in the plants, animals, and the minerals. Ancient Indian history gives a lot of the examples, incidences of the poisoning from the very beginning. One of the interesting facts was of the Kassapa. One of the foremost expert in the science of toxicology was Kassapa, a physician who flourished in the time of the Buddha, 6th century BC. He was successful curer of snake bite. One tale related to him is that King Parikshita had a curse that he would die of a snake bite, but Kassapa had taken it upon himself to cure him when the curse befell on the king. On the destined day, when Takshak, the king of serpents, was going to bite Parikshita, he met Kashyapa on the way and showed him his remarkable powers by biting a fully blossomed tree. In front of everyone's eyes, the tree turned into the ashes. To everyone's surprise, Kashyapa restored the tree to its original blossom. Unfortunately, Kashyapa was soon bowed over by the Takshaka and he finally succeeded in killing Parikshita by his fatal bite. Another famous noble person is Sushruta in the Indian history. The famous Indian surgeon Sushruta defined Agad Tantra, that is called toxicology. It dealt with the diagnosis and treatment of any poison beaten by the poisonous insects or venomous reptiles or affected by any natural, artificial, or compound poison. Kautilya, also known as the Chanakya, the Arthashastra of Kautilya, written in 4th century BC, deals with the toxicology and has the descriptions of many Ayurveda, herbs, metals, herbo-mineral preparations, and the poisonous substances. The concept of Vishkanya was prevalent during the period of the Chandragupta Maurya, around 320 to 298 BC. During his reign, there was a practice of selecting beautiful girls and administering poisons in a small amount until they grew up, thus making them insensitive to the poison. These maidens were called Vishkanyas, Vish poison, Kanyas maiden, or the poison damsels. It was believed that making love with the Vishkanyas could result in the death of their partners. Hence, they were employed to kill the enemies. The word in the literatures from the various world over and the Indian literatures, the term toxicology per se has said to be originated from the various sources. But the one of the most accepted concept is that the word toxicology has originated from the Greek word toxicos or toxicos was an adjective of the noun toxon, which meant the bow. So toxon, Greek word that means a bow, thus we knowing a microorganism, toxoplasma. So bow-like plasma organism is called toxoplasma. But because this thing was applied over the arrow, tip of the arrow of the bow, so this was started to be used for the toxic things, poisonous things as well. So other Greek derivatives of toxicology were toxicon, toxicos, meaning poison or poisons into which arrows were dipped. The Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote about the Cyticon and toxicon as the poison or poison tipped arrows the Scythians used in the warfare. Further, we will study the historical perspective from the 3000 BC to the 90 AD and then 19th AD to up to 1760-99 AD and then from 17th to the 19th century and then the modern period. So dating back to the 3000 BC, the earliest records of poisons involves a god or goddess called Gula or Ninisina. She was associated with poisons and the reference to god appears as early as 4000 BC. This female deity Gula or Ninisina was revered by the Sumerians and known as the goddess of healing, mistress of charms and spells, controller of noxious poison, and the terrible goddess. This was on the record in the Mesopotamian literatures. 3 millennia before the Christ, Menes, the first of pharaohs were the kings of that period of time. They were called the pharaohs in the Egyptian region, and is reported to have cultivated and studied poisonous and medicinal plant and to have accumulated animal, minerals and vegetable poisons. Saint Nung, around 2700 BC, a Yan emperor brought agriculture to the China by inventing plow and the hoe. The teaching of the Chinese people how to cultivate the soil for the production of grain. This was done by the Shen Nung. He was the father of the Chinese pharmacopoeia. Saint Nung was called the divine farmer, and according to the legend, he tested around 300 or more of herbs and plants in order to elucidate their medicinal properties. It was believed that he discovered numerous toxic substances by this method of testing. Saint Nung was credited with being the source of the work titled The Divine Farmer Herb Root Classic. Further, the Ebers Papyrus, that is the oldest written documentation of the medicine in the ancient world, that is of around 1500 BC. It is the oldest known ancient Egyptian medical scroll dating back to the period 1500 to 1500 BC. It was allegedly discovered between the legs of the mummy in the district of Essasif in Thebes. The Ebers Papyrus, you can see this is the Ebers pages of the Ebers Papyrus. Ebers Papyrus mentions over 700 substances and over 300 recipes detailing incantations and concoctions using poisonous or medicinal minerals and the plants. Among these listed are the opium, hemlock, lead, antimony, aconite, and cannabis. The classes of substances mentioned in the Ebers Papyrus includes the stimulants, sedatives, motor excitants, depressants, hypnotics, narcotics, analgesics, antispasmodics, and a lot of list of the variety of the substances has been listed under the Ebers Papyrus. The mythology and the literatures of the classic Greek history shows a considerable knowledge of the poisons. In the Odysseys of Homer, Helen is described as discreetly introducing into the wine of Telemachus and Menelaus, a drug that acted as a powerful anodyne, pain reliever. In the Greek legend, Hecate was knowledgeable about aconite and Medea was familiar with the properties of colchium, and Hercules is said to have made his end from bearing a sword after his wife had impregnated him with the poison. So this poison's history dates back to millions years back. Theophrastus included numerous references to the poisonous plant in his work De Historia Planetarium. Nicander of Colophon wrote two treatises. One was a snake poison and the other on the plant poison, including opium, henbane, poisonous fungi, colchium, aconite, and conium. Nicander divided poisons into those that kill quickly and those that kill slowly. He recommended emetics in the treatment of poisoning that is valid till today as well. The Greek physician Dioscorides classified poisons under three headings: animal poisons, plant poisons, and mineral poisons. You can see this is the simple classification which is similar to the Indian mythology that the initial period the Lord Brahma divided the poisons into the animals, plants, and minerals. And this remained in use for many centuries and is still vaguely recognizable in modern classification of poisons. Poisons were used by the Greek as a means of the capital punishment. The best remembered case being that of the Socrates, who was executed by the administration of hemlock. In 399 BC, Socrates was charged with the religious heresy and corruption of Athenian citizens. He was said that he was corrupting the minds of youngs against the religious scriptures or the religious sayings. So he was poisoned to the death by the Greeks. So he was tried, found guilty, and subsequently sentenced to death by the hemlock. It was also used as a means of political assassination, though this use was developed on much greater scale by the Romans and subsequently thus started the search for the antidotes for the poisons. In fact, it became a practical necessity if the king wished to survive in the office. The Italians developed poisoning as a fine art, and in Venice, there was a council of 10 who met regularly to arrange poisoning for the state, and their written records were preserved. They used to poison the prisoners with the contract and used to test the result of the poisoning. The victims were named, prices were agreed, and the contracts with the poisoners were recorded. When the deed was accomplished, a marginal note, factum, was written in the record and payments were made, sometimes in form of the regular pension. So poisoners became a profession. Poison arrows were prevalent throughout antiquity in both fact and folklore. There are legends like Hercules dipping his arrows in the blood of the Hydra and subsequently using those poisoned arrows to defeat his enemies. You must have seen movies on the Hercules where a Hydra, that is the multiple headed poisonous serpent, will be seen. And that the arrow were dipped in the blood of that Hydra and used over the enemies. Other substances that were believed to have been used beside snake venom included certain plants such as wolfbane, hellebore, and aconite. Literary sources indicate that the Greeks, Scythians, and Nubians all used poison-dipped arrows, javelins, and other weapons in the battle. Theophrastus was the student of the Aristotle and wrote extensively on the subject of botany. He wrote De Historia Plantarum, and a variety of poisonous plants within his work are mentioned. Hippocrates around 460 BC and Democritus were the contemporaries and studied extensively the effect of animal, plant, and mineral poisons on the body. Alexander the Great was possibly poisoned with hellebore or strychnine around 323 BC. Mithridates VI of Pontus tested antidote to the poisons on himself and used the prisoners as the guinea pigs. He created mixture of substances leading to term Mithridatic. Lucius Cornelius Sulla was the Roman general and dictator who preceded the rule of Tsar. Around 81 BC, he issued the law Lex Cornelia de Sicaris that protects the public safety and punishes the act of poisoning. This is perhaps the first law related to the regulation of the poisonous substance. This law clearly states that any person who makes, sells, possesses, or purchases a veneum malum, that is a poisonous or noxious substance, with the intention of committing murder may be tried by the commission for the act. Then the Cleopatra 69 BC experimented with the strychnine and others poisonous on the prisoners and poor. She committed suicide by the Egyptian asp snake. Pedanius Dioscorides was a Greek physician during the time of De Materia Medica. An extensive pharmacopoeia organized by the drugs classes the poisons and physiological effect on the body that we discussed already in the previous slide. The book mentions De Materia Medica mentions over 600 medicinal and toxic plants with full illustrations, uses and preparation and doses of different poisons. In 184 and 180 BC, there was allegedly mass poisoning in the Rome and many were accused and convicted of the crime, although there is some doubt as to their actual guilt. Aulus Cornelius Celsus, Roman encyclopedist and possibly a physician, his only surviving work is De Medicina, is only a small part of his larger encyclopedia but is one of the best sources of Alexandrian medical knowledge. As early as 400 BC, poisons were administered in the wine. Xenophon wrote that poisoning was so frequent among the Medes that testers were employed to sample the wine first and before the king or the nobleman to ensure it was safe and unadulterated. So the profession of testers were there in the around 400 BC. The period between the 400 BC, 400 to the 19 AD may be said to be the medieval and the Renaissance period of the toxicology. The Middle Ages were filled with the scientific discovery and gave rise to Renaissance period. In 994 AD, an outbreak of ergot killed nearly 40,000 people who ingested contaminated wheat, rye, bread. The resulting symptoms, known as St. Anthony's fire, consisted of painful peripheral gangrene, convulsions, hallucinations, and nausea. Moses Maimonides, or the Moses ben Maimon, was a Jewish philosopher and a physician who wrote treatises on poisons and their antidotes. The whole work of the Middle Ages was filled with alchemists experimenting with the minerals and the fire in search of the philosopher's stone. Philosopher's stone is the stone that turns any minerals into the gold. So alchemists were experimenting, and during the experiment, they discovered a lot of minerals, a lot of chemical substances. A book titled Mutus Libris or Wordless Book of Illustrations outlined the method for creating the philosopher's stone. Leonardo da Vinci experimented with the poisons in the Renaissance Italy. He studied with the bioaccumulation of poisons using a procedure he called passages that involved dosing an animal with a lethal dose of poison, preparing an extract of animal's organs, and feeding the extract to another animal. So he was looking for the accumulation of particular poison in particular organs. So in this way, we came to know the accumulation of particular poison in that particular organ. Then the most popular doctrine in the field of toxicology was proposed by the Paracelsus, the physician, alchemist, and philosopher of the late medieval and early Renaissance period. Already we learned that Paracelsus gave the definition of poison as everything is poison. It is the dose that decides the poison or a remedy. So the dose response relationship was proposed by the Paracelsus. His contribution of dose response concept of toxicology is well documented in nearly every textbook on the subject. Giulia Tofana was credited with the poisoning over 600 people in Italy with her concoction known as aqua tofana. The poison was believed to consist of arsenic trioxide in the solution. So during the early period, this arsenic compound poisoning was very commonly used for the homicidal purpose. Georgius Agricola wrote De Re Metallica, the most comprehensive book on mining and metallurgy, that revealed a lot of the metal related poisoning and metallurgy. In 1700, and then comes the chemical age of toxicology, that is between 1700 AD to 1900. So this period was the period of the Industrial Revolution and the research and chemicals, many new chemicals were searched during this period. In 1700, Bernardino Ramazzini, book titled Discourse on the Disease of Worker or De Morbis Artificum Diatriba was published. This book brought much attention to the burgeoning field of industrial hygiene and occupational toxicology. In the end, it is related some 50 or more occupation with its associated disease. So he conducted a study on the industrial hygiene and the occupational toxicology, and with his seminal work outlined particular health hazard of the metals, dust, chemicals and chemical abrasives and associated with occupation such as weaving, farming, mining, masonry and nursing. So he was able to correlate the occupational work and the disease or the pathologies that is being produced. So Bernardino Ramazzini advised the physician that in addition to the previous earlier concept of the Hippocrates and other medical practitioner, that when you come to the patient's house, you must ask him what sort of pains he has, what caused them, how many days has he been ill, whether the bowels are working and what sort of food he eats. This was the earlier dictum, but he added additionally that you must ask one more question. What is the occupation does he follow? The purpose of asking the occupation was that he found that occupation has an important relation with the disease or the pathologies. Percival Pott was a surgeon at London's Bartholomew Hospital from 1744 to 1780. He is well known in the field of toxicology, especially occupational toxicology. for the observation that a squamous cell carcinoma of the scrotum was hazard associated with the chimney sweeps due to their repeated exposure to the soot's particle. This is perhaps the first reported example of polyaromatic hydrocarbon carcinogenicity. So the person who was continuously working in a chimney had exposure to the soot, and that led to the cancer of the scrotum. Richard Mead published a mechanical account of poison in several of his essays, the first book written in the English language devoted entirely to the subject of poisons. The field of chemistry grew, and the isolation of pure drug substances led to more potent medicine during this period. In the 17th and 1800s, many chemists, pharmacists, and doctors were inspired to adopt methods for isolation of drugs from the natural products such as plants and minerals. This period is considered the rapid growth around the world as industrial revolution and was the impetus for the inventions in the mining, medicine, buildings, and transportation. The influence of this industrial revolution was on all the field, and definitely this toxicology was not left behind. The field of toxicology was taking shape on the backdrop of the chemical and industrial revolution. Toxicology, as it exists today, owes its humble beginning to the field of medical jurisprudence and forensics. Medical and criminal cases where poisonings were suspected could not be proven prior to 18th century. The court relied on the full confessions and the witness or circumstantial evidence to prove the poisoning had occurred. In 1752 AD, Mary Blandy went on trial for murdering her father 1 year earlier in 1751 by poisoning him with arsenic. This was the first legal battle in England where chemical tests to detect arsenics were allowed. Surprisingly, the tests that were conducted were more or less qualitative and not without ambiguity. If that type of test is conducted today, that will be not valid. But at that time, this test was accepted by the laws, and they were conducted by the Dr. Anthony Addicnan, who was also medically treated Mr. Blandy and for the alleged poisoning, and who also conducted autopsy in that case. And based on that, the Mary Blandy was convicted in that case. James Mars developed the Mars test for arsenic in 1836 and published his finding in the Edinburgh Philosophical Journal. In 1851, the Arsenic Act was passed in England. This law stated that arsenic sold in quantities of 10 pounds or more had to be colored with a dye of indigo or soot, that a record of the sale had to be kept in a book on the premises. And if the purchaser and seller had to sign on that book, and when the buyer was unknown to the seller, in that case, the third party shall be present as a witness for the sale. This was passed in 1851 as Arsenic Act in England. Friedrich Sertuner was a German pharmacist who discovered and isolated morphine from opium in 1804. He named the compound morphium after the Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. Morphium or morphine is generally accepted as being the first medicinal alkaloid isolated from any plant. So the role of the forensic medicine, medical jurisprudence was observed, and the various toxicologists recommended that this as a medical jurisprudence subject of the forensic toxicology, and toxicology shall be learned by the medical jurisprudence or those involved in the forensic medicine. This was the list of the compounds that were discovered from the various plant sources during the 19th century, like curare developed from the strychnus, toxifera, morphine, narcotine, 1817, strychnine, veratine, brucine, colchicine, caffeine. These all from different the scientists who discovered them. So this was a period of great discoveries that led to revolution in the chemistry, toxicology, and their management, as well as the addiction as well. The compound addiction also increased during this period. Theodore Morley wrote the first American text dedicated to the study of poisons. The book was titled The Microchemistry of Poisons, including their physiological, pathological, and legal relations, and was published in 1869. Orifila, the father of modern toxicology, dedicated his life to the scientific detection of poisons in the organic material. He testified as an expert witness in countless trials, the most famous of which was the trial of the Mary Lafrage, accused and convicted of poisoning her husband in 1841. This Lafrage is again a compound made up of the arsenic. Based on this case, Mary Lafrage. This Lafrage was another name of the compound that is used by Mary Lafrage, and that was made up of the arsenic. Felice Fontana was an Italian physiologist and physicist. However, he made significant contribution to the toxicology. He is considered the father of toxinology, with his study of toxins in various snake venoms. Cured by the quakes in form of elixirs, tonics, potions, liniments, bitters were rampant throughout the 17th to 19th century. And the remedies given by the quakes were the most acceptable by the poor, disabled to the nostrum, and they were known, which had many indications. They became panica for the host of seemingly unrelated ailments. But the side effects of these ailments were very well known at that time, and there was no regulation of any such to those of the compounds. The whatever quakes gave as a remedy, they themselves could result to poisonous effect on the bodies of the, especially among the poor and the disabled. But there was no check or no any restriction on the use of particular poison or any laws related to that at that time. In 1862, under the President Lincoln, the Department of Agriculture was formed with the chemist Charles M. Weatherhill heading up the Division of Chemistry. This department was formed to investigate the adulteration of agricultural products. So this started the laws and this rules started after the 18th century. This is one of the President Lincoln that he allowed by the Department of Agriculture to look for the adulteration of the agricultural products so that the poisonous effect of those can be prevented. Further, the Matthew Orifila, the father of toxicology, modern toxicology particularly, is the Spanish-born French toxicologist and is well known for that Lafrage case of arsenic poisoning. He was the person first to use autopsy material and chemical analysis to prove if someone is poisoned. The famous book of his was Treatise des Poisons, written in 1812, a landmark book on the detection of poisons from human organs. Now coming to the history of development of antidotes. The most famous example of an antidote was that devised by King Mithridates VI, king of Pontus in Asia Minor. Mithridates experimented with the poisons, trying them out on the condemned criminals, and he also tried out various antidotes to the various poisons on these prisoners, either before they were poisoned or immediately after, to see whether the antidotes were effective or not. In this way, he discovered various antidotes, or what he considered to be the antidotes, and he then compounded them all together in order to produce a universal antidotes which could neutralize any poison. Adopting an overcautious approach, he then began taking his supposed universal antidotes daily. It is often stated that original recipe of the Mithridates had more than 36 ingredients. Greek physician Galen said that there were 54. Eventually, Mithridates was defeated by the Roman general and statesman Pompey, and he holed up in his fortress. He massacred his wife, concubines, and daughters. Eventually, the Mithridates took the poison in order to save himself from the conviction, but he was by his daily dose of magnificent antidote, the poison failed to act. So, the universal antidote that he was taking prevented from the poison to act on him. So, this antidote by this time is known as the Mithridatium. Perhaps this is the first well-known antidote in the history of the toxicology. He failed to die from the poison because of this antidote. He had to get his Celtic soldier servant to stab him to death with his sword. After his defeat and death, Pompey discovered Mithridates' notebook on antidotes for the poison, and so Mithridatium became well known in the Rome. Today, Mithridatism is the practice of protecting oneself against a poison by gradually self-administering non-lethal amounts. So, Mithridatism became a concept. Perhaps Chandragupta Maurya's Viskanyas were the example of Mithridatism. Roman Emperor Nero showed a great interest in the poisons. Andromachus, one of the Nero's personal physicians, improved the formula and it then became known as Theriac of Andromachus, containing 64 ingredients, and this included the flesh of vipers. For some strange person, people have always thought that flesh of viper is a good antidote to the poison. Perhaps this thought arose because snakes are poisonous, yet they don't die of their poison. So this thought that as poison containing a snake is not dying, so if someone mix a snake in the antidote, he may be saved. So it is rather reasonable to think that the snake flesh acted as an antidote. Viper's flesh was very common ingredients of any antidote that was developed in the ancient times. In the course of time, theory became not only the antidote against the poison but also a panacea against all the diseases, and it was in the medical use until 18th century. To prevent the fraud in many cities including Venice, Montpellier, Toulouse and Strasbourg, Theriac was carefully compounded and prepared in the public under the official supervision. Even today, Theriac jars can be seen in the museums. Other universal antidotes to the poison which survived for the centuries in popular use were the bezoars, stomach stones, found in certain animals, particularly ruminants and some varieties of goats. They were first used in the Middle East and they were introduced into the Europe by the Arabs, who still have some faith in them in some parts of the Middle East to this present day. These stones were pulverized and put into the drinks of wine to treat cases of poisoning. But small stones were also mounted and worn as amulet as a protection against the poisons. So these stones were worn in the neck to protect against the poison. Another universal antidote was terra sigillata, a special clay earth from the island of Lemnos. To prevent fraud, this clay, a special clay, was prepared in tablets and stamped with a seal, thus giving the substance its name. Later, other sources of similar earth was found in different parts of the Europe, and in the 16th and 17th century, mugs were made of it and from which anyone could drink without fear of poisoning. So this all sorts of the historical development of the antidotes are seen. Now, the science of antidote has become more scientific and we move from the ages of Mithridatum, bezoars, and terra sigillata to the age of physiological antidotes and chelating agents. We will be learning the current antidotes while the management of the poisoning. During World War I, chemical warfare agents were introduced on the field of battle in the form of irritant gases. Chlorine and phosgene carbonyl chloride gases and the sulfur mustard vesicants were responsible for thousands of deaths, and by the end of the war, the number of casualties were high on all the sides. These warfare gases we will read in a separate heading in the detail. Insecticide research led to some of the most dangerous and deadly chemicals known to the man. Prior to 1900, the primary means of reducing insect population was nicotine. Nicotine was first used as an insecticide in 1763. After the 19th century, the first organophosphate insecticide compound able to block the cholinesterase enzyme was tetraethyl pyrophosphate (TEPP). The wide use of DDT, distributed almost exclusively by Jay-Z, eventually led to the resistance in some insect population, and many chemical companies seized upon the opportunity to develop new insecticides. And because of the the research on the insecticide was hampered temporarily. Pesticides research led to synthesis of malathion, parathion, and other organophosphate derivatives with anticholinesterase activities. And we will learn when we will be talking about organophosphate poisoning that how poisonous they are and how lethal the anticholinesterase are being used as warfare agents. In the post-war era, toxicology increased its importance. Lois Goldman, a pharmacist at Chicago Hospital, began a poison call service with a self-compiled, handwritten card index of poisons and antidotes. This is perhaps the first poison information center in the United States. After that, many poison centers had got opened. In the late 1950s, the drug thalidomide was prescribed to pregnant women in the United Kingdom to treat morning sickness. Francis Kelsey of the FDA blocked the US approval after observing an increase in a specific type of birth defect introduced in the women who were taking this drug. Thalidomide was later withdrawn from the market, but not before the thousands were affected by its use, causing thalidomide babies. The fallout from the thalidomide disaster was a reform of the FDA, which FDA is the Food and Drug Administration regulation of the USA, United States, which now requires that all the drugs be tested for the teratogenicity. So the regulation on the drugs came after this episode. Further, Bhopal gas disaster of 1984, that is the release of 40 tons of methyl isocyanide from a Union Carbide plants in India, killed thousands and injured hundreds of people. Another massive disaster was Chernobyl accident at the nuclear power plant. Meltdown released radioactive waste into the atmosphere, poisoning hundreds of thousands of people. Anthrax was used as a warfare agent. Terrorists sent poison letters that crippled the US Postal Service and poisoned many. So in this way we can understand the development of toxicology over a period of time and the changes according to that. So at the present, today with the modern techniques and instrumentation, the most minute traces of alien compounds are able to be detected, not only from the tissues and organs in the post-mortem period, but in the living as well, but also from the biological such as blood, urine that are collected during the life. Several medical journals are completely devoted solely to the study of toxicology. Now the toxicology has advanced to a very great extent, and this has reduced even the incidences of the earlier type of poisoning. But still, because of the revolution, industrial revolution, a lot of chemical has come in the market, and there is a lot of things that has to be looked upon, and especially in the developing countries, to for the control of this toxicology. Now, toxicology is taken up by several promising young students as a career as well. It is no longer the murky, saddy, crime infested vocation of the poisoners. You may find many toxicologist professionals in many metro cities who are exclusively devoted to treatment of the toxic cases, poisoning cases. Now, instead, it has become a true science pursued by the brilliant investigators. So, with this is all about the history. Although history is very vast, a lot of things that need to be read related to the history. You need to learn. I will add reference to the books, papers that has been published on the history, so that you will be get acquainted with what are the historical development over the period of time, and that is the and also how the we have developed toxicology, how we developed poisons, their antidotes, how we tracted them, and all these are under the aspect of the toxicology. By learning this, we can learn how the earlier scientists came to certain findings, and how we can use that knowledge for further advancement of the toxicology. So this become important in that perspective, because who knows the history doesn't mix the mistakes again of the earlier persons. With this, thank you so much for your patient listening.